Good afternoon and welcome to the Brodart Tell Me More Around the World webinar. We have three wonderful authors today and their stories come from all over the world. I'm so excited to introduce you also to our moderator, Dodie Owens. Dodie works at the Denver Public Library. She joined them in 2016 as an adult service librarian at the Central Branch. Dodie has had a variety of positions at the library, and she has moderated for us in the past, and we're very excited to have her introduce our three authors. Hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Featuring three terrific authors coming in today from all over the country. Our first panelist author today is DK Neuro. He is going to be speaking about his forthcoming title coming out in February of 2023, What Napoleon Could Not Do. Following DK will be Jennifer Coburn, author of Cradles of the Reich. That's coming out right now, October 11th. And our final panelist author is Hannah Pilvainen. I think I got it right. I was practicing in my sleep last night. And welcome to everybody who's here today from wherever you are. The authors and I appreciate it, and Brodart certainly appreciates you being here as well. So let's start with DK. DK besides being an author, he's also a curator of special collections at University of Iowa. This is a really important title. I saw a New York Times piece dating back from 2016, I believe, that introduces a lot of the discussion, a lot of the exploration that DK does in his new novel, What Napoleon Could Not Do. And I'm going to let him jump in and tell you what it's all about.
Oh, thank you so much, Dodie. It's really an honor to be here for many reasons. It's always such a joy to be with librarians, in particular, because of the impact that one librarian had on my life. So I grew up in Ghana, in Accra specifically, and my novel, parts of the novel are set in Ghana. But when I moved to the US when I was 11, but before then I lived in Accra. And when I was younger, we lived in an apartment complex that had across the street a makeshift library. And I call it a makeshift library because it was part of a row of stores. And you can think of the stores as bodegas. They were about the size of bodegas. Now, among these stores was this makeshift library. Now, when you entered this place, to the right were shelves of books, and to the left were shelves of VHS tapes. And the lady who ran this library, she very proudly called herself a librarian, despite the fact that she was really running something that she had just kind of cobbled together. Anyway, she would sometimes hand you, so when you checked out a book, she would sometimes hand you the movie version of the book. And I remember when I was young, I checked out The Wonderful World of the Wizard of Oz. And she handed me, of all things, the VHS tapes of The Wiz, which is it's a reinterpretation of The Wizard of Oz starring Diana Ross, Michael Jackson. It's a really great film. If you haven't seen it, you should. So of course I read the book first because I was only interested in the book. And then I thought, hey, let me check out this movie. And it blew my mind. It blew my mind because the book I had read was a picture book, and in it, Dorothy was decidedly white. She was a white girl. And then I turned to this movie, and it turned out that Dorothy could also be Black. And I was young then. I didn't really understand the layers of impact that this was having on me. All I knew is that I really enjoyed this book, and I very much enjoyed the movie then. But as I got older, I came to realize that this librarian had done me such a great service. because not only has she opened my mind to the possibilities of storytelling, she had also planted in me a seed that eventually would give rise to my novel. And I say this because my novel started in particular response to one of my favorite novels, which is Atonement by Ian McEwan. I love that novel very, very much. I first read it in college, and but when I first read it, I didn't have the question that ultimately led me to my novel. All I knew was that, you know, I'm a sucker for a good Victorian novel, and I'm also a sucker for a good postmodern novel. And this novel just blended the two so perfectly. So it was like a win-win-win for me. And I would return to it every year. And in 2015, I returned to the novel. And for the first time, I thought, this conceit. Now, if you haven't read the novel, I won't spoil it for you, but this is what I would say. Part of the conceit of the novel is that Bryony Tallis, who's a 13-year-old girl living in 1930s England, observes something. Now, she's young and she's immature. She has this wild imagination, but she's still young. She observes something and she tells people, she tells her family that this is what happened, and she is believed. And not only is she believed, but what she says is taken as so factual that it ultimately ruins a bunch of people's lives. And what I found so interesting about that was that, what would this piece look like if it's set in Ghana, where children are not only not to be heard, but they're especially not to be believed? I thought it would be impossible for this conceit to work in a Ghanaian setting. And that was what really got me to sit down and start typing. And but ultimately what I arrived at was that, you know, this could possibly work in Ghana. And this gave rise to one of the characters in the novel. His name is Alfred. He's an 8-year-old boy who is not only listened to, but he's often believed by necessity. And that is because his parents are both deaf and mute. And I thought this is the only way that a child would be given voice in a Ghanaian setting. And so that's how the novel started. It started with this character, this young boy, who was the voice between his parents and the rest of the household. Now, novels always evolve from what they started off as. And as I got more and more into the novel, it became clear to me that my immigrant experience in this country was demanding to be brought to bear. And not only my immigrant experience in this country, but that of my family members, that of my friends, other African immigrants. And the novel blossomed into this meditation about the African immigrant experience, both those who are able to migrate and those who are not able to migrate. So the novel focuses on 3 main characters. One is Jacob Nti, who is a 40-year-old Ghanaian man whose one goal, his one American dream, is to be given a visa to the US so that he can finally be with his wife. The other character, Belinda Nti, is his younger sister who lives in the US, but is she's also facing her own obstacles in pursuit of her American dream. And as I put these characters together, I realized that there is no way I could write a robust meditation on the Black immigrant experience without considering the Black American experience writ large, because the Black immigrant experience is very much part of the Black American experience writ large. So I knew that I had to include a character or include some kind of meditation of those who had moved here, but not by choice. And that is the descendants of slaves. And that gave rise to the third character, Wilder Thomas, who who is Belinda's husband and is 30 years her senior. Wilder is a Vietnam War vet, and he has also his own obstacles in pursuit of his American dream. So these three characters, their journeys in pursuit of this American dream, the heartbreaks involved in it, the humor involved in it, is what this novel is about, how their pursuits intermingle and blossom into this ultimate meditation about this pursuit of the American dream.
That's a very, very nice wrap up and summary of it. I do have one question that's been bothering me since I started planning for this webcast. What does that title have to do with the book?
Well, the title is actually from my grandfather, who is now late. He was a fiercely eloquent man. He was an avid reader, and he never said congratulations when you had achieved something great, right? It was too, I guess it was too minimal for him. So he always said, you have done what Napoleon could not do. And that was in reference to the Battle of Waterloo, the great defeat of Napoleon during that battle. But anyway, so he would, anytime I did something great, he would say, Derek, you have done what Napoleon could not do. But there was one time that he simply said congratulations to me. And when I tell you I was heartbroken, especially because I had just graduated from the Iowa Writers Workshop. And I thought, if there were ever a reason for me to hear that I had done what Napoleon could not do, here it was. And yet he did not, he simply said congratulations. Now, he died a year later, and we came to learn that he had been suffering from the dementia, which meant that he didn't have access to his own depth of feeling. And all he could manage at the time was to tell me that all he could manage to say to me was congratulations. But I knew very much that if he were able to access his depth of feeling, he would have said that I had done what Napoleon could not do. Now, there's a character in the novel who is very much inspired by my grandfather. He's the family patriarch. He's Belinda and Jacob's father. He goes by Mr. N.T., and which is my grandfather was Mr. Gemmo. Everybody called him Mr. Gemmo. Nobody ever referred to him by his first name. But yes, he inspired that character. And this novel is entirely in homage to my grandfather, who really inspired so much in me, particularly this love for writing and this pursuit of this career.
That's wonderful. Wonderful story and a wonderful way to work your grandfather into your current literary life and all of our lives as well. Any reader that picks this up is going to have Mr. N.T.
Mr. N.T. is the character, and Mr. Gemmo is my grandfather.
That's correct. That's incredible. That's wonderful. All right, we're going to jump into our next book.
Jody, I'm
Yes.
sorry, a quick housekeeping note we missed in the introduction. As all of the people are joining the webinar, and I hope you're enjoying it, you were not able to chat with us, but if you have questions for any of the authors, there is a Q&A option. Please post those in there, and we will do our best to incorporate your questions for the authors. So please keep that in mind as the day progresses, including any questions you might have had for DK.
Thank you, disembodied voice of Patrick. Okay, so Jennifer Coburn is next, and she is going to be discussing her title, Cradles of the Reich. This comes out on November 11th, and Jennifer has 6 other novels, and she has received numerous awards from the Press Club and Society for Professional Journalists. So let's welcome Jennifer, and let's hear about Cradles of the Reich.
Thank you so much, Dodie. And DK, your book sounds fascinating. One quick thing, my book comes out on October 11th, which is Tuesday. So it's a pleasure to be here. I love libraries and librarians. Not only do librarians inform what I'm going to read next, but the research for Cradles of the Reich would have been impossible without the support of librarians. And also the new library, I shouldn't call it new, it's 10 years old, in San Diego is one of the defining points of our skyline. So it's really an honor to be here speaking with you. So Cradles of the Reich. When I was growing up in New York, my father used to tell me about how his family in Brooklyn prepared for what they feared the most. And that was that Hitler would invade the United States. This was the 1930s, and they watched from abroad. They were in Brooklyn. And our family is Jewish, and they shared a two-family house with a German couple who lived downstairs. And that German couple volunteered to adopt my father, who was a toddler at the time, to save his life. My Aunt Bernice could pass as Gentile, so a Catholic church set aside a spot for her at a convent upstate where they were planning on hiding 9 Jewish girls. But my Aunt Rita had polio, and she walked with a limp. So even if righteous Gentiles like the Kale family or the local parish wanted to save my Aunt Rita, there was no hope for her. Thankfully, Hitler never made it to our shores, but this history, this looming threat haunted my father throughout his life, and in turn, mine. My father often wondered what the United States would look like if Germany won the war. And the answer was always the same: horrendous, especially for families like ours. A few years ago, there was a TV series called The Man in the High Castle, based on the Philip K. Dick novel. And it imagined a dystopian world where the United States lost the war and was part of the Reich. In one scene, a beautiful German woman explained that she had been bred through the Lebensborn Society, which coupled SS officers and German women for the purpose of breeding children, babies, to be adopted by suitable German families. Now, I figured this must have been a fictional element of the show, but I Googled the Lebensborn Society anyway, and I saw a picture, a black and white photo of these nurses all in a row, almost in military fashion, holding little bundles of babies. And it was that point where I learned that the Nazi Lebensborn Society was real, and it operated in secret for 10 years. Adolf Hitler's second in command, Heinrich Himmler, had a plan to create 2 million babies for the Reich. Racially valuable children is what they called them. And this program operated in 3 ways. 1, Aryan women and SS officers were paired together for mating. 2, it was a maternity home, mostly for pregnant, unwed German women. And 3, when the war started in 1939, the Lebensborn program expanded into a kidnapping program where soldiers would identify Aryan-looking children from countries that the Nazis invaded, take them back to Germany for what they called Germanization, and placed for adoptions with good German homes. In the end, 20,000 babies were bred through the Lebensborn program, and 200,000 children were stolen. Blonde hair, blue-eyed children stolen from their parents, who were often killed so that the Nazis could take their racially fit children. I was horrified and fascinated. I had so many questions about how the Lebensborn Society worked. Like, where were these homes? How were the women selected? And why would these women choose to have sex with strangers to breed a child for Hitler. And that's what they called it, having a child for Hitler. So I did what I always do when I want to learn about a period of history. I looked for a well-researched historical novel that would answer all of my questions, but also tell me what was happening in the lives of the women involved in this program. What I found was that there were plenty of nonfiction books, but no novels. So I decided to write the book that I wanted to read with my book club. I almost had to write this book because I couldn't stop thinking about this breeding program and how it existed in the same world as Nazi death camps. While it was the same eugenics plan to create the master race, the Lebensborn program created life at the same time and place where the Nazis were destroying life. It was two sides of the same evil and twisted coin. Throughout my life, I had never heard about Nazi Germany without someone quickly adding that we are to never forget. And I have been deeply moved by the stories of survivors and victims of the Holocaust and of the righteous Gentiles who risked their lives to save innocent people. Through Cradles of the Reich, I aim to explore the three faces of Gentile citizens in Nazi Germany. There is the resistor, represented by Gundi, a university student from Berlin who was pregnant with her Jewish boyfriend's baby. While most women volunteered for the Lebensborn Society, Gundi was forced into the program. The father of her child is assumed to be someone else, not Jewish, and she dares not correct the Nazis. Then there's Irma. She's a nurse who works at the maternity home, and like many Germans at the time, she's keeping her head down. She is a bystander. Initially, Irma feels good about serving the Reich and the women in the program. But soon she learns about the Lebensborn Society and the true mission of the Nazis, and she has to choose sides. Hilda, on the other hand, is a true believer who is thrilled to be pregnant with the baby of a high-ranking officer. These are three fictional characters, but they are at a real Lebensborn home called Heim Hochland, which was the first of the maternity homes, and it was located in Bavaria. Heim Hochland was one of at least 26 Lebensborn homes that were located throughout Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Norway, Austria, Holland, and Sweden. Young women were eager to be part of this program, but why? In order to understand the popularity of the program, I needed to zoom in and explore the culture at that time and how it related to population and motherhood. The German birth rate had been declining for decades, so the Nazi propaganda machine went into effect and started pushing large families as a virtue, and they even offered incentives. The Nazis started referring to families with more than 4 children as child rich. And in 1939, they started awarding war medals, service medals, to mothers who had 4 or more children. This was called the Mutterkreuz, the Mother Cross. Women received a bronze medal for having 4 children, silver for 6, and gold for 8. And mothers would wear this every day with pride. When a member of the Hitler Youth, or the girls' arm of the Hitler Youth, the Bunderdusche Mädel, when these young people would see a mother wearing her Mutterkreuz, they had to stop and salute her as if she were the Führer himself. So the Nazis began teaching girls at a very young age that the most patriotic thing they could do was to have children, and plenty of them. And there were 2 reasons for this. One, as I mentioned, Germany's birth rate was in decline. But also, the Reich was expanding, and the Nazis needed to populate these new territories, what they called the Lebensraum, with new young Nazi families. Not every woman qualified for the Lebensborn Society. The acceptance rate was only 40%. Whether you were already pregnant or willing to become pregnant, young women had to demonstrate racial value. So what does that mean? What does it mean to be racially valuable in the eyes of the Nazi Party? You had to demonstrate 3 generations of pure Aryan blood and 3 generations of good health, meaning no physical or mental disabilities. And the Nazis also had racial screening tools that measured 21 different criteria, like skin color. They had swatches for hair color and eye color and head measurements that were considered Aryan. Now, some of this sounded so unbelievable to one of my early readers, who was incidentally not only Jewish, but a child of a Holocaust survivor. When my friend read the opening chapter where Gundi is having her head measured and her hair color and her eye color and her skin color coded, she wrote to me, "This seems unbelievable." So I developed a series of social media posts where I explain what is fact and what is fiction, and spoiler alert, they're all facts, so that people know that this was real. This was not my overactive imagination. So the women who qualified for the Lebensborn Society went to live in comfortable, beautiful estates decorated with art and furniture stolen from the Jewish people. Researching Cradles of the Reich was a project that gripped me like no other one has before. I feel honored and privileged to tell this story, to let the world know about the Lebensborn program, about how women's bodies were commoditized and politicized, and to, I hope the book will entertain you and enlighten you about a period of time that we really don't know about. And I want to let readers know, women in particular, know that the Lebensborn existed, and here are some red flags to look out for so we can see the early warning signs of the rise of fascism and how it relates to women as well. So thank you very much for your time and for listening to me talk about Cradles of the Reich.
Wow, Jennifer, this story is really right time, right place, considering everything that's going on right now. Your research sounds fascinating. And as a librarian, I say thank you for thanking librarians. We have, we love when authors do their research in using our tools and our resources, which brings me to a question. What kind of rabbit holes did you find yourself going down in your research process?
So I found rabbit holes at every turn. I knew that I would have to find out about the battles and the treaties and the invasions and the non-aggression pacts, and those were fairly easy to research. What was harder was the mundane cultural details, like when a man puts on his pants, does he button, snap, or zipper? When a Nazi has a pin in 1939, if he is a doctor, does the pin have a gold rim, a red rim? Is the imperial eagle turned at profile yet? 2 quick stories on rabbit holes that I went down. I met a German man who is 90 years old who lives in my community, and I called on him for some of these just details that were really hard to find. And I called him once and I said, "Hey, Rolf, I am writing a scene where someone is proposing marriage. And I think it would be sweet if the guy threw a coin in a fountain and made a wish that Irma would marry him. Do you do that? Do you Germans throw a coin, even just a pfennig, into a fountain to make a wish?" And he said, wait, 1 minute. Why is someone throwing away money? And I said, no, just to make a wish. And he said, listen to me, which is really how he started. all of our conversations. Listen to me. If you have a German throwing a coin into a fountain, even a Pfennig, your next scene had better be 6 Germans jumping into the fountain to fight him over it. So that was one example of asking a question and realizing, well, that's the wrong question, and going down a rabbit hole to find the answer. The other one was, I had a scene where Hilda's mother was cooking Hassenpfeffer, which is a braised rabbit stew. So I got in touch with a food historian, Ursula Heinzelman, and I said, Dr. Heinzelman, this family is eating the rabbit stew in April. Are they going to eat a hearty meal like that in the spring? And she said, yeah, that's not your problem. Your problem is that rabbit hunting season ends in December. And I said, okay, well, this is a high-ranking Nazi family. They can hunt anytime they want. And she said, well, they could hunt, but in April, the rabbits would just be coming out of hibernation, which means that they'd be skinny and the meat would be skinny, so the meat would be stringy, not at all good for a rabbit stew. So when you read chapter 2, and Hilda says in her internal dialogue, I wonder where Mama found rabbit this time of year, much less one meaty enough to make a rabbit stew. That was 7.5 hours of research. So the book is filled with that. I read my own novel a couple of nights ago, and I said, I'm going to see if there's one single page that doesn't contain a rabbit hole. And in 320 pages, there are 3 pages that didn't include research rabbit holes. So yeah, there were plenty, and librarians were extremely helpful. Older German people were very helpful. I called on Bernhard Schlink, the author of The Reader, and I asked him to read my manuscript for cultural and linguistic authenticity. And thankfully, he was willing to do that and make sure that all my slangs were right and all of my reactions to because Germans react differently than that's in my hard drive of my brain. So anyway, yes, many rabbit holes.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end to come back and ask you some more questions. Okay, our third panelist today is Hannah Pilvainen, and she is going to be talking about her novel, The End of Drum Time. Hannah has also won the Whiting Award, and this novel takes place in 1851. It's a lovely piece of historical fiction, and we're going to hear from her about that right now.
It's really lovely to be here, and Jennifer and DK, your novels sound very gripping, and I'm excited to check them out. This is also a novel that was very heavily researched, actually for almost a decade, which is kind of mind-boggling to me. It has a complex background. So I'm going to try to keep this simple and just tell it a little bit from like how I came into it, which was that I was raised in a fundamentalist religion with its roots in Finland. And the whole time I was growing up, I was always told, well, our family's Finnish, the religion is Finnish, the man who started this religion is Finnish. And I went on a grant for my MFA program and to Finland. And when I was there, I met with a professor, and this professor studied the religion that I was raised in. And this is such a small community that when I sat down with him in a basement in a mall, I don't know why there's mall basements, basement in a mall in Helsinki, he was like, I've been to your house. You were a baby. Just, you know, I always like a good, weird way for conversations to begin. But that's how small and like, you know, kind of close-knit this religion is. And I started asking these questions about the church because I was like, well, you're a scholar, you know. And he kind of explained to me that when this man who started our the church, which I had left by that point. But when this man named Lars Levi Laestadius started the church, that he had actually started it among the indigenous people of Europe. So like lots of people don't know that the indigenous people of Europe are a thing. And they're the Sami people. One of the main occupations for them historically has been reindeer herding. And so they live in a part of the world that a lot of people know as Lapland, although the correct term for it is Sapmi, S-A-P-M-I. Anyway, so this professor is telling me, well, you know, these Sami people, they weren't really Christian, or they hadn't been for like centuries. Like they had been intermingling with these Europeans, but they really weren't Christian. And then this minister came along, Lars Levi, and he himself, his mother was Sami. And so he had like some Sami in him. And so when he starts preaching for the first time, they all start converting. And he said they even have a phrase for it. They call this the end of drum time. And I heard that phrase in 2009, and I wrote in my notebook, which I still have somewhere. I circled it and I was like, I think this is a title for a novel. Not understanding that I was about to spend 10 years on trips, traveling north of the Arctic Circle, doing research as a fellow at Princeton, as a fellow at the New York Public Library, just absolutely no clue what I was getting myself into. So naivete was there to save the day, I suppose. And initially, most of my research, you know, was books, you know, scholarly articles, texts. I'm trying to figure out, you know, just like the most basic things that I realized I didn't know anything about. I didn't know anything about the Sami people. I didn't know anything about their pre-Christian religion. I realized I didn't know anything sort of concrete about the religion I had been raised in. I had always just was like, well, it's Lutheran. It's a kind of Lutheranism that's, you know, very fundamentalist. And as I began studying it, I became more and more interested in what the relationship was between this religion and the Sami people. And I realized I had to go there. I realized I had to actually get there. And I went on my very first trip in 2013 up north of the Arctic Circle, where on my second day, I accidentally attended a slaughter of 6 reindeer calves. And I was like pulling the fur off of the muscles of reindeer calves as they like hung from the hooks. And I was just like, what did I get myself into? I've always just thought of that moment as this like perfect encapsulation of the I don't know, just like being thrown into the research, I guess. In some ways, it was like I had been doing all these texts and these articles, you know, which of course were so wonderful and rich. I still remember, you know, encountering really early on this, I guess, an autobiography of sorts, in which like one of the chapters was called like How to Catch a Bear by Making It Drunk. And I was like, this is so fun. I love being a writer. This is just what I want to do all day. But then of course, when you're standing there and you're being asked to like pull the fur off of a reindeer calf, you're like, I don't know if I want to be here all day. That's harder. But of course, completely fascinating. And so a few days into my very first trip there, I met up with one of the only female reindeer herders in the world. And I had been in touch with her by email, and she gave me directions for how to get there. I will quote you her directions because they're fabulous. She was like, as you're driving from Norway into Finland, drive 30 kilometers. On the right-hand side, there will be a parking lot. And she's like, I will be there with a snowmobile, a sledge, and my dog. And like, that was it. That was like, and you know what? That was what happened. There was a snowstorm. I rode in a sledge, you know, on the reindeer pelts. She pulled me over this frozen lake. And that was the beginning of a really important you know, friendship that I still maintain to this day with her and her family. And she almost single-handedly taught me everything: how to soften leather, how to sew leather purses, how to collect shoe hay, how to beat and soften shoe hay, like where you would go for shoe hay, how to collect cloudberries, where to buy your knives, how to get jewelry, what to look for in a good knife. Like I would go to museums and I would see pictures of her family in the museum, you know. And so it was just this enormous learning experience. And I would write a draft, and then I would go back for a trip to Sapmi, and I would realize, oh, I don't understand anything yet. I know nothing. And I would write another draft, and then I would do another trip. And then on this trip, you know, she would take me up to the sea, and I would like see the land that got taken away from them. Or I would go to a national park in Finland that used to be where they used to be able to calve their reindeer herds and no longer could because it had been now declared public property. And so then I'd be like, okay, well, I didn't understand that at all. Okay, well, where does that go into the book? And so there was the intersection in some ways between the research for this book and the writing of the book, you know, was really inextricable. And in some ways, I think the book also became like a kind of inquiry into inquiry itself, by which I mean, one of the things inevitably I became interested in was the ethics of representation. What did it mean that I was a white American, Finnish American, however you want to call it, writing about an indigenous community? And I mean, and I should say, because I think it's like relevant and interesting, you know, the Sami community, it largely looks or seems white. And they, at the same time, they're very much still a marginalized community of Europe. And in any case, that kind of question, though, really, really absorbed me. So, and then I had to start doing research into, you know, decolonizing methodologies. Then I had to do, you know, reading into, well, you know, what are the ethics of representing even historical moments, historical texts? What does that mean? And I tried to the extent possible, you know, and it's, you know, as the person who did it, it's always hard to know to what extent you are or are not successful in your endeavor. But one of the things I was quickly interested in was trying to figure out, is there a way to get fiction to sort of both like point to its own construction, you know, as a narrative? And is there a way for the fiction to not recreate the harms that have already been done? And one of the things that I realized really early on, for instance, was that I had been really absorbed in this question of, oh, this religion that my family came from took away aspects of being Sami from the Sami. And over this 10 years, one of the things I realized that I think was like the most, I think, the really in a lot of ways, the greatest gift for me just as a human was to realize that I had been looking at it the wrong way. And I hadn't been thinking as much about what was it that the Sami gave to the religion, and what had I actually inherited via this religion that really wasn't very Christian, and that was actually Sami. And I began to think much more about the effects of being Sami on them. And that really became a huge, when I say them, like on the practitioners of this religion. And so in a lot of ways, you know, it's a novel about religious colonialism. But it's also a novel about how the people who participate in religion change that religion, and how religion is shaped by the place that it forms in. And I think in a very Sami way, it's a novel about how what is human is ultimately shaped by nature itself. And that as much as you might think, oh, humans go around in the world, they control things, they make decisions, right? It's a much more Sami way of being, of life, that have very much come to, you know, in some ways participate in myself now as a worldview, right? Which is that there is both, you know, so much that we don't know, but also like the proverb that is the epigraph for my novel is a Sami proverb, which is "Let the reindeer decide." And I really think that sort of you know, something that I began to realize was that, oh, part of the reason that this religion spread, part of the reason that I exist in the world, you know, is because of reindeer migrations, which is like kind of a crazy thought. And so what ended up happening then in the actual writing of the novel was in some ways it was like I just had all these really big, large, abstract ideas. And then I had all of these really complex political machinations. And it was like, how in the world do you put this in a novel? And I think that's why it took so long for me to write draft after draft after draft. And I ended up landing on using omniscience and trying to use omniscience to enter the perspectives of characters who were Sami, characters who were Swedish, characters who were both Sami and Swedish, characters who were reindeer herders, characters who didn't know anything about reindeer, characters who were from the South, characters who, right? So in some ways, it was very much about the communal collisions that were happening. And then at the same time, because I'm a sap, it's a love story. And it's a love story about the man who starts this religion, Lars Levi Laestadius, his daughter Willa falling in love with the reindeer herder Ivar. But there's another female reindeer herder, Ristin, and she's in love with Ivar too, right? Because she's got to be. And so I think ultimately, I think it's a book that's really trying to ask some really hard questions that I don't know that I, of course, ever answer, but, about how religions begin and why we believe and what happens when we fall in love with someone that we have no way of understanding.
Thank you very much, Hannah. It's fascinating. And it's fascinating how all three of your books, these authors' books, dig deep into their own genealogy, their own heritage, their own ethnicity. One question I had for you, so how effective were these conversions? Once the Sami were converted, did they stay converted, or did they eventually drift back to their own traditional practices?
It's such a complicated question with such a complicated answer. I think I will do my best. And I should say, because it's important somewhat, that the actual title, The End of Drum Time, I came to realize was actually referring to a moment hundreds of years before. So that hypothetically speaking, the Sami had quote unquote lost their religion a long time ago. There's another argument to be made that the Sami never lost their religion at all. And I think that question is one of the things that I have been interested in. Like I was talking about the ways in which parts of the Sami religion became preserved within this Christian religion. And I would say that to this day, for instance, if you go to Sapmi, you will certainly be able to go to services that are Lutheran Laestadian, that are attended by Sami people with Sami practitioners of that belief. It's not a super large community. I couldn't give you a firm number on like the number of actual Sami Laestadians that exist. And also there's a lot of scholarly debate, and you can see probably the academic in me, which is like, no, you can't be pinned down to like a little, reductive sentence. Like one must be subtle and nuanced. So I would just answer you in short, Dodi. I would just say that I would argue that even the Sami who became Christian preserved a great deal of Sami-ness within their Christianity.
There we go. Thank you. We do have some time. We have about 9-10 minutes for questions. If anybody in the audience has a question, throw it into the Q&A right now, and we can throw those questions out to the authors. One question that I came up with for DK, I'm wondering how the intersection of being an art curator and being a writer works for you in your novel.
Well, we were talking about the cover of somebody's novel in the green room, and it jogged my memory of how my cover came to be. So, I'm going to answer this question practically. I'm not going to. I'm going to answer this question in terms of how my job as a curator of special projects at the University of Iowa Stanley Museum of Art has practically informed this novel. And that is, as a result of this job, I was able to connect with one of my favorite Ghanaian artists. His name is Amoakon Boafo to get a work by him for the cover. So the cover of the novel is a work by this wonderful, wonderful Ghanaian artist whose name again is Amoakon Boafo. And what I love about the cover is that it truly represents the sentiments that are alive in the novel. I love the blue. I think that the blue is telling its own story. It has the sense of sweep to it. If you look closely at the work, there's a great deal of brushstroke, which I think captures the sense of sweep. And blue, I think represents several things, including water. You know, there is this idea of having to cross the Atlantic to get to this side of the world if you're coming from Africa. So I just love how layered what a layered story the cover is in of itself telling, and is also telling in conversation with the content of the novel itself.
All right, thank you very much. We do have a question for Hannah. Was most of your research online, electronic, mostly in person, or was it really a split?
It was definitely a split, in part because of my time as a fellow at the New York Public Library. That was hugely important to me because they had access to so many texts that, you know, really old editions of things that, I mean, I had no way of getting access to otherwise, maps and atlases, and also just even like scholarly and academic texts. But for instance, I remember one text I found via the New York Public Library was this, an old, you know, pastor or missionary's accounting of his congregation. And there were names of congregants in there that matched some of my family names, you know, and so that was like just kind of weird to see, you know. And they would also list like, you know, whether or not people were getting vaccinated for smallpox. And of course, I was a fellow during the pandemic. So I found this fascinating too. So it really, I think both types of research were completely essential. In part because to understand the history of it, I needed those historical texts, you know, and I even had a number of documents translated actually via some grants. And that was super useful. And I needed to be there in person. It's very hard, I think, to understand, you know, reindeer herding, no matter how many videos or books you read, until you are sitting in minus 40 degrees, wondering, you know, well, how many hours are we going to be out here?
Thank you very much. We have a question for Jennifer, and then if we can get to it, we have another question for you, Hannah. Jennifer, were you ever able to meet any of the children or their children of the Laban's, I lost my notes.
Laban's, yes.
Yes.
Okay, so it is estimated that only 20% of Laban's-born children know about their heritage. So most of them, they are now in their 70s to 90s. Most of them will die or have died not knowing that they were born to another family or that they were bred. I am about to meet tomorrow night a baby, he's a 77-year-old man, and he was bred through the program. I am having a book launch event tomorrow at the Coronado Public Library, and he saw an article about Cradles of the Reich, and he called me and said, I was born through this program, and I'm coming to your event. So I have not met any of the children, but I'm about to, and I'm really excited. And that is my answer.
Okay, you helped me find the mute button so I can unmute myself. Thank you. All right, I think we have time for one last question. This is for Hannah. This is from one of our audience attendees. They've read We Sinners and loved it. Are there any connections between the characters from We Sinners and the characters in The End of Drum Time? Or is the shared religion the commonality?
Yeah, the only characters that reappear is the character of the minister, Lars Levi Laestadius. His wife, Brita, appears briefly at the end of We Sinners. And so there is that connection, but otherwise, no, I sort of thought about planting some Easter eggs, like, oh, you can maybe find this character, but ultimately I didn't. And I think also, I think ultimately the world of The End of Drum Time just has so much more research in it and is so much more about about the Sami versus the list, the American, of course, or even Finnish community. So it's a very different take. Thank you for the question.
All right, we just have a couple minutes left. I think Patrick has some housekeeping for us about when this will be available. The recording will be available. And
Yes.
then after Patrick's done, we'll sign off.
Excellent. Thank you so much. A special thank you to Dodie Onis from Denver Public for moderating this panel. And of course, a thank you to DK, Jennifer, and Hannah for presenting information on their titles. I know I've got some upcoming readings scheduled now. And also, of course, from Broad Art side, a special thank you to Source Books, Macmillan, and Penguin Random House, who are the publishers of these three titles that are coming out. The recording itself has been recorded. We will be editing that, cleaning it up a little bit for the tail ends, and we will be sending that out to all of the attendees that either whether you've attended here live or if you people that signed up and were unable to attend in person, they will receive a copy of this recording. And be sure to follow Broad Art on social media for additional posts and information as these titles come out. Again, as a rehash, Jennifer's title is actually the one that's coming out soonest. It's actually coming out next week. And then next year, we get to look forward to DK and Hannah's titles. So make sure you are either on the lookout for some ARCs for those or go ahead and put in your pre-orders. Make sure you get them on time.